Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special webinar called Mythos-Ready, Building a Security Program for the AI Vulnerability Storm. We'll give it a minute or two for everybody to filter in through the waiting room, and in the meanwhile, we can get to looking at some pretty cover slides. Let's go ahead and share away. Here we are. Fantastic. We're starting to reach critical mass here. We'll just give it one more minute for folks to all filter in. Um, so, as we start this webinar, it's a little bit of a special topic. It's breaking news. It's something that's sort of rapidly moving, and it's a little bit different from our usual security incident briefings. So today is all about conversation. We'll be adding the Q&A functionality onto this webinar. You'll be able to drop us questions through the Q&A or chat. We'll keep that monitored here whilst we talk on this webinar. So if you have comments, thoughts, questions, things that you want to address, feel free to drop them into the chat and into the Q&A, and we will keep that eye out and weave it into the conversation and hopefully make it a very conversational brief. With that, once again, everybody, welcome to today's webinar, which is Mythos-Ready, Building a Security Program for the Coming AI Vulnerability Storm. A pretty strong title. And because of that, we are today talking to, I'm one of your hosts. My name is Ilkka Turner. I'm the field CTO here at Sonatype. I work with our customers based out of here in Europe. And to look at their software supply chains and been doing it for quite a while. And joining me today is a man I would characterize as an agentic front runner, Mitchell Johnson. Hi, Mitchell.
Hey, Ilka. Thanks everyone for joining. Really pleased to be here.
Really excited to have you along. Mitchell is the Chief Product Development Officer here at Sonatype, and you have been, interacting with agentic systems for quite a long time in your career, haven't you?
Well, I think agentic systems are kind of like dog years. They haven't been around for that long, but yes, we at Sonatype have been helping our customers make sense and use and safely deploy open source for a long time. Now we're certainly helping them use open source safely and productively as part of agentic systems. So as long as they've been around, we have been pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And that's a pretty interesting background just in relation of today's topic because it feels like just like the world of agentic is measured in dog years, the news cycle about agentic influence in the software supply chain security world feels like it's been years, but actually it's just been weeks. There's been one announcement after another and one sort of related and interesting incident after another. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to talk to you a little bit about what is going on and how they all relate to themselves. So let's start with sort of let's take two steps back. We'll leave this slide over here as sort of a little bit of thought-provoking thing. But over the last, I'm going to say 6 months or so, one of the interesting things that, well, actually a year or so, a couple of years now, we have been seeing that AI vulnerability discovery has kind of gone through a little bit of a transformation, just like every other parts of the SDLC. We've started seeing sort of human-led research, people looking at code, spending time thinking about it, kind of looking at it, then responsibly starting to disclose it, to an interesting world where increasingly vulnerabilities are being discovered. First, using LLM assistance, using LLMs to analyze code faster, but also to paralyze a lot of the manual actions that have been happening. So, Mitchell, you obviously lead all parts of Sonatype's vulnerability discovery and security research among your many responsibilities. And it would be really interesting to get your perspective on the transformation, even at current gen technologies. What has been the effect on vulnerability discovery when we've added AI-based capabilities into the mix?
Yeah, and I think it's important. Like we have been using AI, obviously generative AI is, a couple years old, but we've been using AI to augment our security research team for a number of years on our pipelines. But to answer your question, and I think the TLDR on this slide is, before generative AI and certainly before, Mythos has obviously exploded on the scene. It's we're all thinking about it. But Mythos is just the beginning, right? That's just I think a crystallizing point that these models now are moving so rapidly that the old model of, hey, we have time to research, then we disclose, then we have time to patch. We all have big backlogs of vulnerabilities. We're kind of hitting I think we're hitting a critical point where that manual human in the loop process just isn't going to be fast enough. This is a classic supply chain story of cycle time. The cycle
Mm.
time from identification and the sophistication of vulnerabilities and malicious packages, those are two different but related things, is simply too fast for the old process. So what you see on the right here is what we call vulnops moving, unfortunately, faster than any of us like, from a nice to have to a must have. If you're not automating within your organization, the triaging and the remediation, simply going to move too fast for you to respond, and it's going to quickly become overwhelming. Again, Mythos is just the latest, but it's just going to get faster.
So in with keeping with the theme of looking at that sort of evolving capability, I think when we talk to a lot of customers, you kind of see an interesting segmentation of folks and their sort of level of capability. We kind of got the 20% front runners that are really, really deeply embracing and embedding technology. We would class ourselves probably into that category, given that, for the last 8 years, we've been leveraging AI-based technologies in malware discovery, in identifying security vulnerabilities, and, seeing real performance gains in our ability to bring customers up to date and accurate information about security vulnerabilities. But at the same time, sort of a 50% majority, I think, is still very much stuck at the, hey, ChatGPT 3.5 was a really useful thing. Hey, it can write my emails, and maybe it could produce some code as well. And I think to your point, that sort of world is rapidly disappearing into the dust. And we're starting to enter into an era where the agentic gains, the ability to use these current gen models that we are even seeing right now, have started adding on to the adversary capability of both discovering new vulnerabilities, but also to exploit them in an automatic fashion.
Yeah, that's right. It's not just obviously whenever these disruptive technologies have come out, whether they're automation or automation of the CI/CD pipeline or cloud, we always have to remember, right? The defenders, the folks on this call, the enterprises that we serve, have this capability, but also the attackers have it as well, right? And that's why I think Anthropic made the responsible decision to give a set of defenders this technology first, the hope being that we can remediate some of the latent vulnerabilities that haven't been discovered before these models are released. But we all know, again, Mythos is a fantastic model by all accounts, but it is just the beginning. OpenAI dropped GPT 5.4 Cyber with similar capabilities. Google is not far behind. And obviously the purveyors of the open source models are close. The TLDR here is that the cycle times are speeding up so fast. You have to change what worked yesterday, 3 months ago, is not going to work going forward. You have to automate your vulnops.
Yeah, and I think a really interesting point that I often think about when we look at these sort of step changes in capabilities is about 2 years ago we were one of the first organizations on the planet to discover what we arguably thought was the first ChatGPT written malware payload in a software supply chain package. And I believe that we found it because it had Spanish comments in it, and one of our Spanish-speaking vulnerability researchers actually replicated the prompt and managed to get the exact same payload. And this was at the era where you tricked ChatGPT into generating malicious code by pretending that your granny was sick and so on, kind of doing the usual jailbreaks of that era. And I think the reality is that the speed, we've actually had our first question here. The to Lawson Arrington's comment here. It seems like Mythos reduces the life of a 0 day. If so, does it also reduce time to mitigation? Both are true. But an interesting white paper was published about a week ago, literally a week ago on Sunday, by the Cloud Security Alliance, titled "The AI Storm: Mythos-Ready, Getting Ready for a Mythos Era Security Program." And in the author list of that white paper is pretty much the who's who in the security business. It's got Jen Easterly, the former CISO director. It's got the former head of NSA cybersecurity. It's got Google's current CISO, as well as I believe Google Cloud's former CISO, as authors, fact checkers, etc. And in it, they said that what's different in this era of cat and mouse game of this vulnerability discovery and defense, um, what's really happening is the attackers are starting to gain a sort of asymmetric advantage because they're able to discover new undiscoverable discovered vulnerabilities. The models are able to correlate, seemingly unrelated vulnerabilities together into new novel types of attacks. And what they really caution, their words, not mine, is that there might be, a constant stream of new higher critical level security vulnerabilities that are now going to be coming at faster and faster paces. So the technology foundation itself is there. We've seen adversaries leverage LLMs for quite a long time. Even I believe the Axios attack a couple of weeks ago, a lot of the malware payload was vibe coded. Like I think the attackers actually left like comments in there saying, "Don't judge me for vibe coding this section because I don't write JavaScript." Um, and as a result, really what's happening here is that the time from a vulnerability to be discovered to it being leveraged effectively in an attack is effectively going from about, I think the average today is about 10 hours. It's going to start dropping towards zero, and then it's going to go into the negative territory. The challenge is that on the defense side, you're not having those discoveries. You have to be able to react to new discoveries and preventative actions a lot faster than you have ever before, because the rules of responsible disclosure might not apply anymore when we look at it that way.
That's right. There's no doubt, and I would encourage everyone. The paper, from um, um, the Cloud Security Alliance is titled "The AI Vulnerability Storm." Building a Mythos-Ready organization. I encourage everyone to read it. It's very insightful and it's very approachable as well. And it absolutely, to the question from one of our participants here, yes, intuitively the discovery time of 0 days and the remediation times is going to improve, but that assumes that defenders have their operations set up with the appropriate automation where they can identify, mitigate, and change hundreds, if not thousands, of applications on a continuous basis. Um, and I think it's important to separate. We're talking about vulnerabilities in legitimate open source packages, right? And 0 days being discovered in those. And I mentioned earlier, malicious packages are very different than vulnerable, potentially vulnerable open source. And where we're talking, so malicious packages or open source malware or whatever the nomenclature you want to use, that's a very different kettle of fish. The attackers are now recognized, right? These are the smartest, oftentimes state actors. These are very smart individuals, and their whole job, they don't have roadmaps, they don't have other priorities like everyone on this call does. Defenders tend to have other priorities. We've got to deliver our roadmaps, we've got to deliver the innovation, we've got to deliver the revenue, and we've got to mitigate security vulnerabilities. Their whole job is to attack, right? And that's why there's an asymmetric nature here. But malicious packages, these are packages that are specifically purpose built to exploit the developer and the CI/CD tool chain. These are packages, there's no intention of getting these packages into production or waiting. These are packages that are purpose built. We want them to be installed on the developer's machine. As soon as they're installed on the developer's machine, their malicious payload is reduced. Now they're even getting clever enough to delete themselves, delete their trail, delete their evidence. But the whole idea is just to get a package. And we're seeing attackers use the signals from the generative AI models on what the generative AI model is recommending to provide the evidentiary they need to produce a specific package, right, based off the gaps that are being created. So it is a cat and mouse game. There's no doubt the best organizations are going to automate their vulnops. There's going to be faster identification of 0 days and remediation of those 0 days, but it's going to create a whole new set of areas that will be exploited around this speed. And as you know, I'll show a demo here in a minute that'll hopefully kind of highlight how even with whether it's Mythos or what comes after Mythos, the best generative AI model, they do have structural problems. One of the most common questions we get asked is, well, isn't this going to solve security in the supply chain? With these models being so good, they can identify very sophisticated vulnerabilities and attacks eventually better than the best human researcher. I don't think we're quite there, but we're getting very close to it, and we will get there. No, absolutely not. Fundamentally, a generative AI model is trained on a dated data source, so it's backwards looking. And I think where the newest attack vectors will ultimately show up is in real time attack vectors, because that's what will be exposed. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a
Well,
minute.
I actually really good segue into those two questions that we received from Mahendra, which is, are we leveraging these capabilities? Hey, why won't custom people just adopt this kind of new model and be able to discover it? Well, couple of things. To Mitchell's point, LLM models have a noise cutoff date. They do have a lot of tricks behind the scenes to kind of keep the updates relevant, but a good example is interestingly, when we look at open source consumption behavior, we can look at high profile security vulnerabilities like Log4Shell as an example. What we have actually not that we've observed is a meaningful increase in open source consumption that we believe is probably a direct correlation of code assistance being leveraged, AI developing more code. But what we are not seeing, crucially, is an increase in behavior of more secure code consumption. LLM models don't know anything beyond the point that they were trained on, and training an LLM model, especially at the foundation level, takes a long, long time. So essentially, our take is that you're going to continue needing something that is going to be able to give up-to-date, minute-by-minute information, but that's also accurate. One thing that we often see with AI adoption is that you're also going to start burning tokens very quickly if you just hope that the model itself is going to reason its way out into the right dependency choices, into the right things. And that process can actually, based on research that we have recently published, be 70 times more expensive than it needs to be. So there is a real element there. Now, Aniket has actually asked us a really good question, and I want to talk to this slide for it and move on a little bit. Um, Vulnerability intelligence, even before these new levels of capabilities, at current gen capabilities, has already been under pressure. If you look at the NVD as an example, about a big amount of vulnerabilities there haven't got vulnerability criticality scores at all. When they are scored, for example, by our security researchers, we are seeing that over 46% of those are now rated high or critical, which means that people are using AI to discover these kind of new novel CVEs, and they are discovering more and more of them. Even more alarmingly, the NVD itself, or the National Institute of Standards, this week, late last week, went on stage at a conference and to Aniket's point, stated publicly that they are now only focusing on government focused software, which means that they will actually apply prioritization rules on enriching metadata. So CVEs themselves don't really carry much information. The severity scores and the CPs and all the rest come from the NVD. The NVD historically has been one of the central locations of security intelligence, although we have not relied on it for many, many years solely. Um, they have now said we will only focus on software used by the federal government when it is known exploited, and after that, all software used by the federal government, and only after that, software that fulfills certain criticality criterias. So we're sort of hit with a double whammy. There's this sort of sense that these new level of capabilities will just increase the volume of security vulnerabilities. And the databases that used to be sort of the backbone of the low and easy remediation cycle. Still, many organizations kind of use CVs as shorthand for this is a known and legitimate thing that we will focus on. That statement no longer is correct.
So Ilka, what I mean, just to answer, the question in the chat about, we have always part of what the Sonatype value proposition is. We have, I'm not sure you can validate this, but certainly one of the largest, if not the largest, open source security research team in the world. One of the most sophisticated. Obviously, we run Maven Central. It's our job to it's really our job to first and foremost focus on the integrity of the Java supply chain. So part of the Sonatype value proposition, right, is we're looking at we're looking at NVD certainly, but we look at many, many, many sources of vulnerabilities, and we're enriching that data set. And ultimately, what you're getting when you work with us is access to that security research team and the intelligence. So, um, you know, we expect that we have enriched our pipelines with the latest and greatest models, and we will continue to augment it based off the evolution here. But that's a key part of value proposition with working with us is we're going to keep updating our pipeline so that you don't have to.
And I think a very important statement actually to make just to other questions that we're seeing here is that we have not solely relied on the NVD for a long time now. Uh, in fact, you could argue that one of the key reasons why we developed our data services in the first place was that the NVD wasn't really a very good source for open source vulnerabilities for many reasons. Some of them very design focused, some of them just on the sense that not a lot of open source vulnerabilities ever go to official CVEs. So today already, what you're really getting from us is our ability to correlate information, not just from the NVD, but from hundreds of other sources where we actually today even look at commit by commit to find security vulnerabilities and then give them a Sonatype ID if a CVE doesn't exist. And usually there's like a 100-day gap historically where that's actually been happening. So it's pretty key things. Um, moving on. Moving on from this. So to answer Tony's question explicitly, if NIST isn't covering public CVs, we will continue to do so as we have done many years now, and you'll get it faster from us than you got from those sorts of sources, and then some. All the other value added info. Moving back to this piece, though, I really want to focus the conversation now on what's really happening. So the gap between discovery and exploitation is really kind of shrinking down. One of the sort of concerning phenomena really here is that vulnerability discovery will be bespoke, and when models like this in the next 12 to 24 months proliferate into the wider world, it's likely that we're going to start seeing faster weaponization, increased attack activity, and as a result, a lot more disclosures and a lot more activity that organizations are going to have to start performing. And I think that's really where this sort of thing resembles a supply chain problem quite heavily, because in the end the most attractive target will continue to be popular open source projects. In fact, one anecdotal piece of observation I can say is open source vulnerabilities. Open source vulnerabilities open source usage tends to be higher with code assisted coding agent produced code than you might expect. In fact, coding agents are really good at leveraging software supply chain as a part of writing software, which makes them more efficient at innovating and writing loads of things. But what really ends up happening is that the software supply chain fundamentals that we've been talking about many years, having a catalog, understanding where your software is coming from, being able to list and audit those things, just doesn't it just needs to scale to that new level of automation, and that needs to enter into a sort of new era. Um, and because open source comprises of the majority of modern application code, that means that we must close that gap between the sort of modern application security practices of focusing after the fact scans of your existing code and really place a lot more emphasis on understanding exactly what's coming into your supply chain.
Yeah, I would add to this. I mean, fundamental, like again, all this stuff, at the end of the day, like some of the smartest people in the world are on this call. You guys build software and secure the supply chain for a living. It's intuitive, right? With generative AI, what does generative AI provide us as developers? It allows us to move faster. So we're going to create more applications. We're going to enhance the existing applications we have more frequently. We're going to burn through those backlogs faster. So we're creating more applications. We're building our applications more frequently. We're making those applications more feature rich. And ultimately, so more applications, more builds. That means more open source. If 80 to 90% of applications in the enterprise are comprised by lines of code of open source modules, modern development, again, this isn't a surprise. Modern development is about stitching together a lot of components with first party code. Generative AI models are fantastic, at least in our experience, with the right prompts and the right grounding. Ilka talked about grounding at writing first party code, but they have a structural challenge with their ability to select the right third-party dependencies because they're built on older data, and they don't have all of the context of that real-time information. So you have more applications, you have more builds, and which means you have more opportunities, more at bats to introduce vulnerabilities and malicious packages. It's kind of simple arithmetic, and that's what we're seeing in the cycle time speeding up, not just for zero-day identification and but also just more applications faster.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where the sort of mental mind shift, if we start moving on towards the future focus needs to start occurring. The control model is now shifting towards really being able to control the SDLC at scale. Because historically speaking, it was really at the before release, we're going to make sure that our code's straight, that everything that we're building at the head is clean. But now, because of the increased importance of the supply chain, as well as the increased speed at which the supply chain is targeted, you have to have these far left control points that you might have not historically had. And the fact simply is that humans just can't keep up with this pace anymore. The speed of discovery is just speeding up to the sort of machine level where we are identifying and exploiting these things within minutes.
And I would add again, like we've been taught, shift left is not new. We have all been talking about it. Some of us have implemented, but the reality is the data shows that many enterprises, while they've made strides at equipping their developers and we all know from a Deming supply chain view that you want to build quality into our products. You want to build security in. You can't test those in later. You can't apply them later. All of us understand that. But the reality is what we've seen is because of the pressure on modern organizations, whether it's to focus our resources on creating and roadmaps, we just haven't seen. The data suggests that many enterprises still have not opted to shift left and to automate their vulnops. Well, I think where the if you don't remember anything, I think what the takeaway from the Cloud Security Alliance and Mythos is that it's no longer a nice automation's no longer a nice to have. It's a must have at this pace, and it's only going to get faster. So I think that's a key takeaway of Mythos that all of us should be like really reflecting on the time we've got to do it now.
Exactly. And I think the control point really has to be the software supply chain now. The only way that we can influence this is that we move the control model much more towards an agentic future. One of the key recommendations that the CSA had was, hey, you're going to introduce these agents. You're going to introduce these agents anyway. And as a result, the agents are going to make autonomous decisions. They are going to be consuming these components faster. So we got a double whammy again. Humans consume a lot of open source. Agents consume even more open source faster 24/7. And as a result, we have got to find a way of drilling intelligence into those systems. So very helpfully, somebody's asked, what are the recommendations from Sonatype? So at this point, we thought we might show you a little bit of a demo of how this could look like in practice. And then we'll come back quickly and share some key 30, 60, 90-day recommendations on how you can start introducing some of these in your environment.
Great. Thanks, Ilka. So I'm gonna, Ilka said, these are very different times and we're doing some things differently. So I'm going to violate that old rule and I'm going to do a live demo. So this is not recorded. For the webinar here, I rolled a little application that helps select an LLM. So it provides the manufacturer of the LLM when that LLM was released, the context, which is a proxy, obviously, for the size of the power of the model. Just a very simple application to kind of prove to showcase some of the things that we should do, and then we'll get into specific recommendations. And obviously, after this webinar, we'd love to help anyone on the call kind of put these things in action. So what you're looking at here is Cursor, which is a popular generative AI coding assistant. But everything you're seeing here with Sonatype in our tool set, it works with whatever tool you use, Claude, Copilot, Kiro, Google, Gemini. It's a, truly vendor agnostic solution. We'll talk about that in a moment. Our developer tool is called Guide. Everyone on the call, we'd encourage you to go out. It's free to get started. It's a free solution. There are enterprise versions of this once you want to scale, and we'll talk about those recommendations. Many of you are customers and have these solutions already. But what you're seeing here is a very simple application built JavaScript, and you'll see a couple of things here. You'll see a dependency. I'm sure anyone who's ever coded in JavaScript knows Axios. We know it, we love it, we all use it. Ilka hinted earlier at a supply chain attack that hit just a few weeks ago. And I want to showcase what would have happened, right? I'm a developer, I'm coding. My business partner tells me we've got a critical release we've got to get out, and I log in on Monday, and here I am in my application. And I'm going to start with Sonnet. There's a lot of talk about models. So if you're familiar with Sonnet, I think let's actually ask. Ilka talked about when was your data training cutoff? I know some people are out there thinking, well, why don't you use a frontier model like Opus 4.7? Maybe it's going to perform better at dependency resolution. I will show the frontier, but I wanted to start here. And it kind of says, hey, my knowledge was last updated April 2024. I don't have information about events, development, or changes after that date. I think this is important. Like, don't take my word for it. Ask the model. It will tell you. And so I'm a developer. I come in here, and what do I want to try to do? Well, maybe I want to make a change. If you're also familiar with kind of SemVer, many JavaScript applications, we don't recommend it, but many developers do a little annotation like this, and they tell their JavaScript to take the latest version. We do not recommend that, but it is a very popular convention. If you would have done that on March 27th, you would have been impacted by the Axios supply chain attack because you would have gotten version 1.14.1. But let's actually ask. Here we are. Let's ask um, our generative AI coding assistant, hey, can I use this version of Axios 1.14.1? Can I upgrade to this? This is what would have happened just a couple of weeks ago if I would have been working before this malicious package was discovered. Somebody, Ilka, keep me honest. I think Sonatype customers would have been protected here in a couple minutes. Uh,
In fact, 0 minutes,
0
because
minutes. Oh, that's the
when
best
the
answer.
when the malware payload was published, we actually turn it into a pending state, and customers are protected when we make a determination. 1 minute from that point, we actually smelt the malware package immediately, and we labeled the package as malicious.
So here's what Sonnet said. Gosh, here's what I can tell you. I don't really know. I don't really know if it's safe or not. I don't know if it has vulnerabilities or not. I can't verify if it's legitimate. Now, I told it not to use the Sonatype guide tool, the MCP here, but it said maybe you should check with that. But you're saying, well, Sonnet's an old model. Sonnet was dropped back in September of 2025. Back to that, so one of my colleagues said last week was a great year. So everything's moving faster. But September 2025 in AI terms is might as well have been 10 years ago. But let's try this same test with the very best model that Anthropic has dropped in GA mode, which is Opus 4.7. Heck, I'm going to use the high thinking mode here, the most expensive model that we have access to. And let's ask it the same question. Surely it's going to be better at figuring out if this is a good dependency or not. Let's ask it its training cutoff date first. Oh, that's better. Early 2025. So just a year old, just over a year old. Spoiler alert, none of us want our security tooling. I don't know when Mythos cutoff is, but I imagine it's 6 to 9 months ago. That's probably, something knowable. But we don't want to, the takeaway here is you want to ground your generative AI tool in real time intelligence that only your organization has behind your firewall and your security policy and your application policy. And that's what a platform like the Sonatype Nexus One platform brings is the real-time element to something that is inherently lagged. So let's ask it, should I upgrade? Maybe this frontier model will do better. Let's see. Based on my knowledge, yes, you should upgrade to it. That looks like a great version. It's a minor patch release. It should be safe. It does at least thankfully tell us that I haven't validated it against any live or real-time information and my knowledge is old. Why don't we ask it to use the Sonatype guide MCP? That's the takeaway. And this is how your developer would work in real time. They have the MCP server. They wouldn't have to prompt it and tell it. It's just there working on their behalf. Why don't you ask the Sonatype MCP server if we can use that version? See what it says.
Always great when you're doing live demos.
That's what I said.
Comes
You
out.
never in a non-deterministic world. Um, So no, we use this stuff at scale, as do our customers. So we're very confident. Whoa,
Oh,
do not upgrade to that version. That is a malicious and non-compliant package. And those of you that are familiar with Sonatype, a big part of our value is you codify your security policy in real time into the platform. So we know your security policy because you've entrusted us and hired us with that. We know your application context. We know your security policy, and we have the world's largest open source component and vulnerability and malicious package knowledge graph that is updated in real time and is backed by those security professionals. So it says, do not use that. Oh, and by the way, the version you're currently using has problems. It has these CVEs. Here is the recommended version that you should do. And we also check if it has breaking changes for you. And we say, no, it's not going to break from this version to this version. We look at the APIs and we make sure that it's backwards compatible. That's called a golden version. And we tell you how to update it. Would you like me to update this change? That's how a developer works in real time in the age of AI. So step one, you said, what should we actually do? You got to equip your developer with real-time intelligence. If they're using generative AI coding assistance, it doesn't matter how new the model is. They need this tool set. So
I
quick
think
little demo that shows it in practice. Um, um,
I think something that you really, that was really interesting in the screen that you just shared, and literally that was a live response. We haven't tested this beforehand. Was, oops, my guess was wrong. This is a frontier model. It was released less than a week ago. Like 4.7 is that new. Um, and that's sort of the thing. It's one thing to have a model that's got a big discovery capability, but it's another thing to make that be an effective coding assistant. So moving on into the final portion, something I wanted to really spend a little bit of time kind of picking your brain on is what should we now do? Like we got about 90 days before the first, less than 90 days, I'm going to say maybe 80 days. Anthropic's Project Glasswing is going to release those testing vulnerabilities discovered by Mythos at that time. In the meantime, open source models are going to start catching up. We're going to start seeing models being released with increased capability. Even the Cloud Security Alliance white paper says you can expect 12 to 24-month window, that kind of capability, standard capability. So what should you do now in the next 30 days to prepare your organization? And what we've sort of done here is we've kind of looked at sort of five categories: intake, see everything, prioritize, fix safely, prove readiness, and really sort of itemized some of those main items. So Mitchell, why don't you walk us through the high levels here of
yeah,
the next 30 days?
yeah. I showed, your engineers are on the front lines using this stuff and working with their AppSec team. So you've got to equip them with the best real-time intelligence so that you're manufacturing security and quality in. But what I showed you there was not automation. That was live development. And so, first and foremost, you got to control the intake, right? So use a binary repository. You should be proxying component requests through a binary repository. Obviously, we have what we think is the best one out there, Nexus repository, but it is extremely, it's always been extremely risky, and we've been banging the drum on this, but you simply can't have folks going out to public repositories and hitting them directly. That the attackers are hoping that those shadow downloads continue. So route all your OSS through proxies, and you need to really understand the difference between malicious packages, which are purpose built for attacking developers and CI/CD tool chains, and vulnerable open source, and the techniques for those are different, right? So we need to be ensuring that we're blocking malicious and policy violating packages. So having, firewalling your OSS that is coming into your organization. And increasingly, that's not just for humans, that's your AI agents. I don't know about you, but when I'm working now, I have dozens of AI agents working on my behalf. And that will be agentic next. The difference is, agent-based development. I'm directing those agents, but I'm still in the loop, much like a manager, an engineering manager managing a team of agents. Agentic is the agent is actually managing the agents, and we're starting to see those workflows. So you've got to govern those agents and the humans directing those agents. Um, the tool that I just showed, Guide, you got to equip them with the MCP and the real-time tools. But then you have to put the automation in place, right? And that is in your CI/CD pipelines where you are continuously evaluating those dependencies and up automating. The technology is here now to automate that process fully, to take that burden off your developers so that you can move at machine speed. That includes both your internally produced software and third-party software. So doing things like SBOM scanning, making sure that you're evaluating those third-party applications and their SBOMs. We always like to do this kind of test, right? If React for shell or log for J, if a major 0 day dropped within, could you instantly tell, and I mean instantly tell, what applications in your estate have that exact version, and how long would it take you to identify who the application owner is and the pipeline and importantly, how long would it take you to get a remediated version out? That cycle time needs to be like the best that we've seen. Organizations can do that in about what, Ilka, 8 to 12 hours. They have their entire estate. That won't be fast enough.
Correct.
But start
Correct.
with that test. Challenge yourself. We call that an emergency vulnops response drill. Like do a live incident. How quickly could you do that, and then put that automation in your
And I
CI/CD
think
pipeline.
I think now, in the next 30 days, just to summarize everything we just heard there, it's really important to get to the fundamentals. Do we have the ingress control? Can we produce SBOMs at scale? Do we even have SBOM management in the first place? And from there, do we have the right technology landscape in mind when we're thinking about how to defend against this? The reality is, developers are already using agentic. Our attackers and our adversaries have agentic planes and agents in order to attack us. Running a live incident response drill now and seeing where things shake will help a lot if we assume that in the next 60 to 90 days, we're going to start seeing more and more of those incidents occurring. Good news, by the way, is some of the questions I'm seeing here. Any modifications needed for the repo firewall policies? No, this is a capability you can turn on with your Nexus repository right now, and we're working hard to expand that control plane to any network connection so that you're able to audit open source packages coming in based on your organizational policy. When we're moving into the day 30 to 60, the real key thing is understanding where those shake points are and starting to standardize these upstream repositories. One of the key things about agentic development is that it needs to follow your SDLC standards. It needs to be configured to use the same ingress points. It needs to have the same levels of configuration, and it needs to be able to follow those same principles as your developers. But now your incident response needs to speed up. So you need to start applying information like contextual policy about exploitability, business criticality, assigning clear ownership, running those exercises of who owns these SBOMs, who runs these things, um, and also understanding that you're not just expecting OSS patches, you're also going to be expecting patches from your vendors who might be using different types of open source, might be issuing patches because of exploitation events there. So just like with Log4Shell, there's a first party estate fixing and there's a third party estate fixing. And each of those, you can measure differently, come up with MTTRs and try and drive that cycle time down. And for the first time ever, the target number is zero or as close as you can at least get to it based on the technology at hand. So, um, so, um, uh, moving on into that last section, if we move into that 90-day range, um, kind of looking at the questions that are coming here as well. Um, really, it's time to start applying many of these discoveries, many of these fire drills, and move that back into automation. So some of the questions we're getting, Mitchell, I'll just leave this here for folks to consume, and we're going to come back to this, is the technology and the data sources that we were using. Where were they coming from? And in fact, Nicholas Caruso asked over there, hey, can you repeat how long it took until Sonatype detected Axios and blocked it? 0 minutes was the answer. Zero, because as soon as it was published, we put it to a pending zone, and we wouldn't have allowed you to download it. And then within 1 minute, we discovered the malware payload and said, no, that's definitely not coming in. And it got moved
I think
aside.
that's an important for obviously a lot of folks on here may be new to Sonatype. I mean, a key part of the supply chain, the Nexus One supply chain platform that we offer is we would assume that an unknown component is that has to be vetted, and so you wouldn't your developer would request that it goes into a quarantine state, it's immediately vetted, and then it's cleared or blocked. So the whole principle is if you think about least privileges and zero trust, you should not trust unvetted components coming into your environment. The attackers certainly hope that you do trust them. And historical development models are, hey, developers can grab whatever component they want. Obviously, we're way past that, and that's
Yeah.
a key part of what the infrastructure does. We would not trust a component till it's been vetted.
And that's part of the reason why things like running a RAG against like a public database wouldn't work, because there's so much more to verifying a vulnerability, keeping it current, making sure that it's deduplicated against what's publicly reported. There really are no standards to this sort of thing. So that's a key part of the value proposition of an organization like ourselves, is to be able to do all of those things beforehand, so that you as an organization can focus on the main key things, which is you're able to standardize on this approved upgrade path, implement automation that works at scale. And we're literally talking thousands of changes a day scale on a given application, and then be able to report on it and truly discover what exactly is going on at your current software estate, at a sub-component level, to be able to address these issues. So, a couple of final questions here. Final questions. We're coming to the end. We'll scale out, send out some of these slides for you afterwards. Um, from a overview question, easy one for us to answer. Are the agentics you use Sonatype's own, and are they available to customers? Rachel, I think you might want to take
Yeah,
this one.
so we always focus on problems, right? And I'll answer the question. So we have our own proprietary development frameworks, tools. I mentioned the security research AI. We've been using AI before anyone probably heard the term LLM to develop our pipelines and augment our security research. So the short answer is yes and no. We will offer an agent-based solution for automating dependency management. A big part of our value proposition has always been to help customers safely and productively use open source, and put reliable automation in place in the dependency management. And we offer that today. You can automate your dependency management with our platform. Increasingly, though, as we said, the pace has to accelerate, which means that agents will ultimately have to be involved in that, and we will release agents that customers will be able to adopt to, if they choose to manage their dependency management. We solve that problem today. We will solve that problem even more in a more advanced way with both deterministic and non-deterministic AI-based solutions as part of our Nexus One platform. So we will be releasing those. So really good question.
And the very short answer is yes, it's available. Everything that you've seen here today is a capability of our platform. And the good news is we're thinking about this at a scale that is measured in billions of requests on an annualized basis. And when we look at these tools, they are really designed to address this sort of era of automation. What's changed and what's something that we are calling to action to everybody is really you have got to shift your thinking from these are going to be discrete events triggered by discrete developers that know what they're doing to much more of a these are going to happen on automation 365, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the week. And the upstream is already doing it. The adversaries are doing it. So being prepared for these types of attacks really pays off now. We have a bit of a window before these things really start coming through. Um, with that, we've got time for a couple of final questions here on the list. How does Nexus enforce blocking of transitive runtime dependencies that aren't explicitly pinned in our pipeline? Specifically, if dependencies are resolved dynamically within CI/CD actions, what mechanisms do you use to detect and prevent these artifacts from being pulled in at runtime? Um, the good news is, any artifact that is acquired, whether or not that be directly or explicitly, has a fingerprint. And that fingerprint can be identified, for example, at a network layer. So as long as you're acquiring components through any sort of formal means, usually they come from an upstream registry. We were able to audit that component either, for example, using edge nodes like Zscaler or through explicit artifact repositories to be able to say, hey, this thing carries issues that Sonatype has identified and collected, and thus we're able to stop that process from ending. What's really important to say, though, is that CI/CD actions are a big part of a puzzle, and increasingly we're actually seeing these malware attacks targeting the developer desktop directly. The GitHub action overtakes and things like that are very attractive targets for adversaries as well, and we've seen them to be used to great efficiency. But increasingly, those attacks are also shifting further left. How can we integrate AI into our existing Nexus IQ scanning process at the organizational level? That's quite a high
So,
level question.
so I would start with our guide solution, go guide.sonatype.com. It's a free solution to get started, so go give it a try. Part of that is the MCP server. So if you have agents that you're running internally, you can use that MCP server to connect to this real-time intelligence graph. The enterprise version of that solution connects directly to your lifecycle and your policy engine and your IDP and all those things. So whatever AI you're wanting to integrate into your CI/CD and your security program, if you wanted to tap the real-time graph from Sonatype, you can do that directly with the MCP server.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we've come to time on our webinar. There's a bunch of questions we haven't gotten around to yet, but don't worry, we'll take a good look at those and come up for round two. Thanks, Mitchell, very much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll
Everyone,
distribute slides and recordings afterwards. Have a great day, y'all.
thanks very much.